Now, I know we've worked you exceedingly hard this morning and have not had as much time for some of the conversation as we would all like, just because we've had some wonderful, wonderful speakers and on a very complex topic that I think many of us are still struggling with clearly delineating roles and missions. But I think today over lunch we have one of the most wonderful. If I had to choose who I wanted to be a keynoter, and I did, it was Senator Collins, because I think she literally has her fingerprints on every major piece of legislation, whether relating to Homeland Security, FEMA in terms of response and recovery, intelligence in terms of the creation of the Directorate of National Intelligence. Senator Collins is there. She represents the fine state of Maine. She has done so as a senator since 1996. I think everyone here knows as well as I do that Senator Collins not only is a wonderful representative for Maine, but is also one of the few public servants who is able to get beyond party, is able to really look at the hard issues that affect not only her constituents but all of us as Americans. And Senator Collins, I think you've been extremely courageous in terms of some of the issues you've had to deal with and to be able to cross party lines to make sure that we can ultimately all succeed as a country. Senator Collins, and one of the things that I find most interesting in her bio, as you saw, both her mother and her father have served as mayor of Caribou, Maine, so it's fair to say that public service is in your blood, and for that we're all delighted. I also have an uncle who is a Democrat and a mayor in Wells-Ogunquit who has nothing but the finest things to be able to say about Senator Collins. So her reputation transcends party. I'm normally on the other side of Senator Collins. She always asks tough questions. I think I've had the privilege and opportunity to testify before her maybe 5 or 6 times, and I must say that her committee really does get to the root of all issues. And today her committee is looking at crafting legislation and the complex issue all of us are thinking about. And without further ado, I want to thank you again, Senator Collins, for taking time out of your busy schedule, and welcome you to GW.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank, very much for that gracious introduction. I'm not going to put you on the spot by asking you how your uncle voted last fall. But I am pleased that he's one of my constituents. And I want to thank you personally for the invaluable advice that you've given our Homeland Security Committee on a wide range of issues that we've tackled during the past 8 years. It's also a great honor to see Charlie Allen here today, a true institution and someone else that the committee relies very heavily on. And I want to thank all of you for caring enough about this extraordinarily important issue to gather here today to exchange views, to hear from speakers, and to challenge one another. It seems that every week we learn of additional threats to the security of our cyber infrastructure. The internet, undoubtedly one of the most significant inventions in all of history, now connects and enables a great deal of activity every day, from commerce to entertainment to government. But every innovation carries with it new risks, and by now the vulnerabilities of cyberspace are all too evident. Consider these sobering facts. Cybercrime costs our national economy an estimated $8 billion annually. Hackers can operate in relative safety and anonymity from a laptop or a desktop anywhere in the world. Cyber terrorists have the potential to attack high-impact targets, disrupting telecommunication systems, shutting down electric power grids, or freezing financial markets, causing billions of dollars in damage and threatening thousands of lives. Examples of recent cybersecurity incidents are myriad and disturbing. For example, press reports indicate that China and Russia have attempted to map the United States electric grid and have left behind software that could be activated later, perhaps to disrupt or destroy components. The Washington Post has reported that hackers broke into the Pentagon's Joint Strike Fighter project and stole information. Last year, cyber thieves secretly implanted circuitry into the keypads sold to British supermarkets, which were then used to steal account information and PIN numbers. And in 2007, the country of Estonia was attacked in cyberspace. Those attacks, which I understand were described to you earlier today by the Estonian defense minister, involved a flood of data that nearly crippled the country's infrastructure for information. These attacks and hundreds like them, undoubtedly attacks are going on even as we meet here right now. Whether on our government or private sector systems, have ushered in a new age of cybercrime and indeed cyber warfare. They underscore the high priority that we must give to the security of our information technology systems. Despite these ominous warning signs, we have not done nearly enough over the years to effectively secure most government IT systems. The Federal Information Security Management Act, you're probably one of the few groups in the world that know the acronym of FISMA, gives the Office of Management and Budget broad authority to oversee agency information security measures. But in practice, however, FISMA is often seen as simply a paperwork exercise, providing little real security and leading to a disjointed cybersecurity regime in which each federal agency haphazardly implements its own security measures. With federal networks increasingly interconnected, any vulnerability in one system represents a potential vulnerability to all. Computer interconnectivity continues to increase, and this trend represents and increases a greater threat of cyber terrorism exponentially. It is fair for you to ask, what will it take for the federal government to finally get serious about protecting the vulnerable frontier of cyberspace? Will this nation have to endure a cyber 9/11 before our government finally recognizes the importance of protecting our digital resources, limiting our vulnerabilities, and mitigating the consequences of exploitations? We all hope and pray that such an event will never happen, but we cannot pretend that such a threat does not exist, particularly in an era of global terrorism with enemies sworn to our destruction. And for those of you in this room who have been privy to the classified briefings, as I have, it is truly scary to see the attacks that are occurring each and every day. Indeed, to ignore the warning signs and to merely hope for the best would be irresponsible. We must practice vigilance at every turn and that extends to the internet and the field of cybersecurity. Chairman Joe Lieberman and I have focused considerable effort on these matters from our posts as the leaders of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. And I commend Joe for his strong leadership in this area. Indeed, during his tenure as chairman, we have held 3 public hearings in addition to receiving numerous classified briefings on cybersecurity. And over the last few years, our staffs have held numerous hearings and meetings and briefings with experts on this issue, including many of you in this room. Today, I will state what is obvious to all of you. It is time to take action. We must move past the planning stage and into the doing stage. A strong defense against a cyber attack is a key component of effective deterrence. Clearly, the current state of affairs, which really is a laissez-faire attitude toward protecting our nation's digital assets, cannot continue. The United States requires a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy backed by aggressive implementation of effective security measures. There must be unparalleled coordination among law enforcement, intelligence agencies, our military, and the private owners and operators of critical infrastructure. Now, some have suggested that this effort can best be led from the White House. I've reached a different conclusion. Truly securing our information technology infrastructure will require more than just high-level strategy and coordination. There must be aggressive oversight, evaluation, and testing of systems. There must be constant, real-time monitoring of security and analyses of threats. In short, effectively managing government cybersecurity is going to require more than a few staff crammed into a cubicle in the depths of the White House. The National Security Agency and other intelligence agencies obviously possess enormous skills and resources, but I believe that privacy and civil liberties demands preclude those agencies from shouldering the leadership role in the security of our civilian information technology systems. And I emphasize the word civilian. The internet is a critical tool for open, free communication. Security in civilian government systems must take that reality into account. Now, the intelligence community must play a critical role in providing threat information, but it cannot lead the cybersecurity effort for the civilian agencies in the private sector. Logically, any effort, if I believe it, it's the logical effort, if you notice that. Logically, any effort to secure our civilian government systems and our critical cyber infrastructure must leverage the mission and the resources of the Department of Homeland Security. DHS was tapped for precisely this role in the presidential directive issued last year. DHS is already the department within the federal government building partnerships with the private sector to secure our critical infrastructure and key resources. In fact, DHS has done good work in implementing the directive. Just last Friday, Secretary Napolitano opened the department's new National Cybersecurity and Communications Coordination Integration Center. Despite its long name, this is a 24-hour coordinated watch and warning center that is designed to bolster cyber information sharing and incident response. Despite these commendable efforts, however, the department still lacks the authority and the resources that it needs to secure our federal and private sector networks. Some will argue that a single federal department or agency is not muscular enough to direct other federal departments and agencies to secure their IT infrastructure. But Congress has dealt with complex challenges involving the need for interagency coordination in the past. And what we've found is that when we establish strong leaders with supporting organizational structures to coordinate and implement action across agencies, we can recognize and respect disparate agency missions while improving the overall coordination and security. And let me give you an example. The establishment of a National Counterterrorism Center within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, something that was done by the 2004 Intelligence Reform Act and Terrorism Prevention Act, which I was the prime author with, along with Joe Lieberman and Pete Hoekstra and Jane Harmon in the House, is a prime example of a successful government reorganization that implemented the missions of multiple agencies. In fact, Joe and I love going to visit the National Counterterrorism Center because we've seen such tremendous progress in the last few years in bringing that center up to the level that we envisioned. The NCTC director is responsible for the strategic planning of joint counterterrorism operations, and in this role, he reports to the president. When implementing the information analysis, integration, and sharing mission of the center, the NCTC director reports to the DNI. These dual roles, and there was a lot of debate about whether this would work, these dual roles provide access to the president on strategic interagency matters while providing the NCTC with the structural support and the resources of the Office of the DNI to complete the day-to-day work of the center. I'm convinced that a similar construct could improve the security of civilian information systems and of our critical cyber infrastructure in the private sector. A cybersecurity center anchored at DHS with a strong and empowered leader would close the coordination gaps that currently exist in our disjointed federal efforts. The director of the center could help enforce compliance with cybersecurity standards promulgated by the OMB and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. For example, the director would have the ability to red team agency systems, recommend security measures, and insist that agencies explain actions taken based on security recommendations. The director would also coordinate information sharing on threats and vulnerabilities on our cyber infrastructure across the federal government. The director would also serve, under my construct, as the principal advisor to the president on cybersecurity. We don't need yet another White House czar. A czar who would conflict with statutory duties established elsewhere. We need to have coordination, and I think by designating the director to report to DHS on the day-to-day operations and serve as the principal advisor to the president would solve the problems that arise when you create a new czar within the White House. For the day-to-day operations, the center would use the resources of DHS, and the director would report directly to the Secretary of Homeland Security. These dual ranks of responsibility would give the director sufficient stature and rank to interact effectively and directly with the heads of other departments and agencies, as well as with the private sector. Now, let me emphasize, I'm not saying that the National Security Council would not have an important role to play. Clearly, the NSC would perform its traditional coordination role and would need to ensure that our military, intelligence, and law enforcement activities complement and inform our efforts to protect civilian networks. The director would also work with the National Institute of Standards and Technology to prioritize the development of standards and performance metrics and establish a baseline for cybersecurity. Working with the intelligence community and the infrastructure experts that already exist at DHS as well as across the government, the director would be charged with identifying and warning about cyber vulnerabilities and threats to the federal and critical private sector networks. The director would also work with civilian agencies to establish strong policies for personnel security assurance, including mechanisms to help ensure the integrity of personnel and contractors, to lessen the cybersecurity threat that can occur through insiders. Departments and agencies would be required to respond to these warnings, implementing security measures recommended by the director or explaining alternative steps that they have taken to secure their systems against identified threats. The director would be charged with developing a supply chain risk management strategy, promoting a risk-based strategy to secure federal information systems from development to acquisition and through their operational life cycle. We should also consider giving the director the authority to review the IT security budgets and acquisition policies across these civilian agencies. Now, I'm not saying that the director should micromanage individual procurements or direct investments, but what we've seen too often is that security is simply an afterthought for too many of our civilian agencies. Recommending security investments to OMB and providing strategic guidance on security enhancements early in the development and acquisition process will help bake in the security. It can no longer be just an afterthought. Now think about the improvements that would make in the federal acquisition policies across government. But there's another important benefit. It would have a ripple effect in the larger commercial market simply because the government is such a huge buyer of IT. So I think that the result would be that the government's vast purchasing power would establish new security baselines for services and products offered to the general public. What would happen is you would see improvements baked into the hardware and software that is available to everyone. And in this sense, the rising security tide would lift all boats. I think we should have been able to come up with an IT metaphor on that. Perhaps we'll have a contest on that. The center could also serve as a single point of contact for the private sector, communicating and educating regarding cybersecurity best practices and ensuring the timely communication of threat and vulnerability determinations. At one of our hearings, we learned that particularly smaller businesses are at a loss whom to turn to in the federal government. They don't have the in-house capabilities that a large business has. But even a large business like Hannaford Brothers, a supermarket chain that is in my state, which was the victim of a cyber attack, has found it difficult to know whom to turn to and where can you go for the best practices. So that is another advantage of creating this very visible approach. Finally, the director would be empowered to address directly those cyber threats and vulnerabilities that affect the most significant components of our critical infrastructure. We are all aware that of those who seek to do this country harm in a significant way. And it is obvious that we are vulnerable to a cyber attack. Think of an attack that could be launched remotely on critical infrastructure, such as a large dam, the electric grid, our financial systems, even a nuclear power plant. We need a process for ensuring that these particularly critical assets have sufficient cybersecurity. With nearly 85% of the country's critical infrastructure in private hands, this is no small challenge. But our government, led by a director of the Cybersecurity Center, could help close critical vulnerabilities in these systems and mitigate the consequences of cyber attacks. I believe that the development and dissemination of best practices alone would do much to improve cybersecurity in the private sector. I also think we should take a look at perhaps the model that we created for the security of chemical plant facilities. What we did is we allowed DHS for the top tier to first of all figure out who's in the top tier by doing vulnerability assessments, and then set standards, not tell facilities how to reach the standards, but set standards. Such an approach, it seems to me, would hold value when it comes to protecting critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. It is vitally important that this be a strong public-private partnership to protect cyberspace, a vital engine of our economy, our government, our country, and our future. The time for promises, planning, and pondering has passed. The time for action is now. We need your help to get this right, and I encourage you to continue to work with my very talented staff on the Homeland Security Committee to help us get it right. Thank you.
Senator Collins, on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to leave you with a small token. I promise to get you out of here on time for your next meeting. This is literally and figuratively a token. It's a quote from George Washington, our coin, seek truth and pursue it steadily. Let me say on behalf of everyone here, thank you for your service. And let me also suggest that all the too hard categories, you've managed a way to address those issues and get things done. So for all those who put their arms up and say too hard, not if Senator Collins is on the job. So thank you, Senator Collins.
Thank you. Thank you.